10 Most Evil Experiments Against Humanity. 1. The Tuskegee Experiments. There's a good reason many African Americans are wary of the good intentions of government and the medical establishment. Even today, many believe the conspiracy theory that AIDS, which ravaged the African American community, both gay and straight, was created by the government to wipe out African Americans. What happened in Tuskegee, Alabama in 1932 is one explanation for these fears. At the time, treatments for syphilis, a sexually transmitted disease that causes pain, insanity, and ultimately death, were mostly toxic and ineffective. Things like mercury, which caused kidney failure, mouth ulcers, tooth loss, insanity, and death. Government-funded doctors decided it would be interesting to see if no treatment at all was better than the treatments they were using. So began the Tuskegee experiments. 2. The Aversion Project. They didn't like gay people in apartheid-era South Africa, especially in the armed forces. How they got rid of them is shocking. Using army psychiatrists and military chaplains, who were presumably privy to private, confidential confessions, the apartheid regime flushed out homosexuals in the armed forces. But it did not evict them from the military. The undesirables were sent to a military hospital near Pretoria, to a place called Ward 22, which in itself sounds terrifying. 3. Guatemalan STD Study. Syphilis seemed to bring out the inherent racism in government-funded doctors in the 1940s. Tuskegee's black people weren't the only victims of morally reprehensible studies of this disease. Turns out Guatemalans were also deemed suitable unknowing guinea pigs by the U.S. government. Penicillin having emerged as a cure for syphilis in 1947, the government decided to see just how effective it was. The way to do this, the government decided, was to turn syphilitic prostitutes loose on Guatemalan prison inmates, mental patients and soldiers, none of whom consented to be subjects of an experiment. If actual sex didn't infect the subject, then surreptitious inoculation did the trick. 4. Agent Orange Experiments. Prisoners, like people of color, have often been the unwilling objects of evil experiments. From 1965 to 1966, Dr. Albert Kligman, funded by Dow Chemical, Johnson & Johnson, and the U.S. Army, conducted what was deemed dermatological research on approximately 75 prisoners. What was actually being studied was the effects of Agent Orange on humans. Prisoners were injected with dioxin, a toxic byproduct of Agent Orange, minus 468 times the amount the study originally called for. The results were prisoners with volcanic eruptions of chlorine, severe acne combined with blackhead cysts, pustules, and other really bad stuff on the face, armpits, and groin. Long after the experiments ended, prisoners continued to suffer from the effects of the exposure. 5. Irradiation of black cancer patients. During the Cold War, the US and the Soviet Union spent much of their time trying to figure out if they could survive a nuclear catastrophe. How much radiation could a human body take? This would be important information for the Pentagon to know in order to protect its soldiers in the event they were crazy enough to start an atomic holocaust. Enter the seeming go-to-government choice for secret experimentation: unknowing African Americans. From 1960 until 1971, Dr. Eugene Sanger, a radiologist at the University of Cincinnati, led an experiment exposing 88 cancer patients, poor and mostly black, to whole-body radiation, even though this sort of treatment had already been pretty well discredited for the types of cancer these patients had. 6. Slave experiments. It should be no surprise that experiments were often conducted on human chattel during America's shameful slavery history. The man considered the father of modern gynecology, J. Marion Sims, conducted numerous experiments on female slaves between 1845 and 1849. The women, afflicted with vesicovaginal fistulas, a tear between the vagina and the bladder, suffered greatly from the condition and were incontinent, resulting in societal ostracism. 7. The Chamber. Back to the Cold War. Prisoners were again the victims, as the Soviet secret police conducted poison experiments in Soviet gulags. The Soviets hoped to develop a deadly poison gas that was tasteless and odorless, At the laboratory, known as the chamber, unknowing and unwilling prisoners were given preparations of mustard gas, ricin, digitoxin, and other concoctions, hidden in meals, beverages, or given as medication. Presumably, many of these prisoners were not happy with their meals, although, being the Gulag, records are spotty. The secret police apparently did finally come up with their dream poison called C2. According to witnesses, it caused actual physical changes. Victims became shorter, and victims subsequently weakened and died within 15 minutes. 8. World War II. Heyday of evil experiments. While evil experiments may have been going on in the U.S. during World War II, Tuskegee, for example, it's hard to argue that the Nazis and the Japanese are the indisputable kings of evil experimentation. The Germans, of course, conducted their well-known experiments on Jewish prisoners, and, to a much lesser extent, Romani people and homosexuals and Poles, among others, in their concentration/death camps. In 1942, the Luftwaffe submerged naked prisoners in ice water for up to 3 hours to study the effects of cold temperatures on human beings and to devise ways to rewarm them once subjected. 9. The Monster Study. Add children to the list of vulnerable people subjected to evil experiments. In 1939, Wendell Johnson, University of Iowa speech pathologist, and his grad student Mary Tudor conducted stuttering experiments on 22 non-stuttering orphan children. The children were split into 2 groups. One group was given positive speech therapy, praising them for their fluent speech. The unfortunate other group was given negative therapy, harshly criticizing them for any flaw in their speech abilities, labeling them stutterers. 10. Project 4.1. Project 4.1 was a medical study conducted on the natives of the Marshall Islands, who in 1952 were exposed to radiation fallout from the Castle Bravo nuclear test at Bikini Atoll, which inadvertently blew up wine to the nearby islands. Instead of informing the residents of the island of their exposure and treating the victims while they studied them, the U.S. elected instead just to watch quietly and see what happened. Though, what do you think of our video? Let me know in the comment section below. Before you go, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Thank you for joining.